Hey, beautiful friend. This episode might be a little controversial, but I think it needs to be said. There's an elephant in the room. You might have been given a label already, like depression, anxiety, insomnia, ADHD, autism spectrum, maybe something else. That label came from a book called the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, published by the American Psychiatric Association. And it defines what's normal and what's disordered. But here's the question no one asks. Who decides what's normal? And what happens when normal is actually the problem? So let's talk about the book, where it came from. I'll give you some history because this book didn't just fall from the sky. Before the DSM, what did we do with mentally ill people? We had asylums. People were locked away. They were given ice bath, insulin shock treatments, early electric shock treatments, and then there was the Thorazine shuffle. Patients drugged into compliance, shuffling down the hallway. That was mental health care and the best they had at the time. So the American Psychiatric Association in the late 1960s started asking a fair question. Plus we had some meds. Can we do better? Can we standardize how we identify and treat these conditions? And that impulse, that was genuinely a humane thing. But here's what also happened. Professions need an identity. Psychiatry needed to say, this is what we do. We treat disorders, and here's the book that defines them. Standardization, professional legitimacy, a shared language. Not a bad thing. The people writing this book, many of them are from the guardian temperaments. They follow the scientific method. They value structure, protocol, consensus, what's observable in the environment. And there's nothing wrong with that, unless the method has a blind spot built in. And then the 80s hit, and a few things happened in that decade. There was Willowbrook. This was Geraldo Rivera's breakthrough piece that made him famous. If you don't know the story, it was about a state institution for children with intellectual disabilities. Horrific conditions exposed, and there was national outrage about it. So that started deinstitutionalization. A lot of patients were moving out of hospitals into communities. There were new ECT guidelines formed then because they learned you can do this more safely with a muscle paralytic. And people could come in and out of it more quickly with consent, more humane, because in the past, frying someone's brain without consent isn't treatment. Oh, and I didn't mention the lobotomies. There's still some now for seizure disorders, but not like back before, the modernization of psychiatry. So they were making progress, real progress. And the DSM keeps getting revised. And not because of a breakthrough in the brain science, because our culture shifts around us. So let's look at a couple examples. Homosexuality. It was listed as a mental disorder until 1973. It wasn't removed because they found new neurons that indicated, anything to do with this. It was removed because activists pushed. Attitudes changed. So one day it was a disorder, and the next day it wasn't. Let's look at kink and BDSM. That was pathologized for decades. The DSM-5 came out in 2013, and it clarified it's only a disorder if it causes distress or harm. So the behavior didn't change, just the label changed. Do you see this pattern? The DSM reflects cultural norms, not objective brain disease. What's disordered is what deviates from what the dominant culture expects. And let's talk about the money game. Follow the money here. Something else also happened in the 80s. The Prozac Revolution. It opened the floodgates. Suddenly, there was big money in psychopharmacology, drug trials, research funding, and the DSM became something it wasn't originally designed to be. It became the inclusion criteria for drug studies and studies on efficacy of therapy, but here's how it works. To run a study or trial, you need to define who's in it and standardize things. So the DSM provides that checklist. If you have these symptoms, you meet diagnostic criteria and you're in. If you don't, you're out. So the book starts optimizing for what's observable and measurable for quantitative research protocols, checkboxes. Can the clinician see it from the outside? Can we count it? Can we track it on a scale? That's the empirical method, and the empirical method is valuable. But what gets lost? What's happening on the inside? What it's like to be the person sitting in the chair in a psychiatrist's office. What it feels like. What's happening in your nervous system. What you believe about yourself that you can't articulate. The inner experience gone from the checklist. So let's talk about a lens shift. Meanwhile, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is taking over as the therapy of choice. It says, change your thoughts, you can change your feelings. Measurable outcomes, short-term treatment, insurance company loved it. And I need to say something uncomfortable here. The clinicians who write the DSM, the most published, the most funded, the most influential in the field, some of them have financial ties to pharmaceutical companies. They have to disclose them at speaking events, but they get kickbacks, consulting fees, speaking engagements. Not everybody, and many clinicians, even the ones who make money, can genuinely care about their patients. But when the book that defines what's wrong with you is written by people who have financial incentive tied to the treatment of what's wrong with you, you should at least ask the question about the ethics and morality of this. That's what we do. We're the idealists. So, I was trained in the DSM-3 when I first started in grad school as a nurse. Then the DSM-4 came out during my career. And then in 2013, 13 years ago now, the DSM-5. 3 editions, each one different. And there were committees that met and all sorts of, consensus meetings about what to include and what to not include. I happen to specialize in complex trauma, which is only classified as PTSD NOS, because that one is not in the book, which limits diagnosis and treatment of it. Back to child abuse again. A lot of my patients who were abused as children could benefit from this, but I'm off on a little rabbit hole. Each one is different, every single one of the books. Each one reflects whatever the profession believed at that point in time. And I was always a different kind of clinician. My brain naturally wanted to see the patterns, wanted to know what my patients were experiencing on the inside. Not what was observable on the outside, because I felt like it was better care if I could understand people, speak their language, and I'm doing this channel where I'm speaking multiple languages to better communicate, hopefully, and help the content land. And I did a lot of education along with therapy and med management. So I found the DSM could describe what was measurable, observable, and what fits with empirical scientific method, and I use that to diagnose people, but I also saw these other patterns. And when there was a human being in pain sitting across from me, that checklist couldn't guide all the interventions that needed to be done. So here's what I want you to understand. I'm not just throwing the DSM in the trash. I'm not telling anybody to. It's what we've had, and many good clinicians have used it with care and compassion. It gave us a shared language and professional identity. But I just want to shift the lens a little bit. So instead of, we are society, why don't you fit in? I'm asking, What is it like on the inside for a person who is having difficulty navigating this world? Because I believe if you get to the root cause and you look at it from the lens of the patient, you get more effective solutions. If you look at it from the lens of the institution, it gets murkier because there's money in the system, money in the solution, and the patient and the whole experience and the whole point of it can get lost. So that's the lens for everything we talk about here. Not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you and what does your body need right now? So let's look at who decides normal. Here's something interesting. The guardian temperament people, the SJ types, they make up an estimated 40 to 45% of the population. They're the majority. The guardian values, they value tradition, stability, rules, fitting in, observable data, doing things the right way. But what if normal is just what guardians do? What about the other 55 to 60% of us? Statistics work this way. Normal equals what most people do. Abnormal means deviation from the mean. Deviation gets labeled as disorder. So what gets pathologized? Not fitting in. Too much energy or too little energy. Thinking differently. Feeling too much. But is the person disordered? Or is it the environment the problem? It wasn't designed for that person. So let's look at depression too. You know, the old story and what we say is chemical imbalance. That's what depression is. You need medication to fix your brain chemistry. So the implication there is your brain is broken. So let's shift our lens and look at polyvagal theory. What does that tell us? Depression is often dorsal vagal shutdown. The nervous system learned too much, can't cope, shut down. It's a survival response, not a brain defect. Your nervous system isn't broken. It's doing what it learned to do in an overwhelming environment. Shutdown is protective. The disorder is actually your body's wisdom. Look at seasonal affective disorder too, which I always said was the sun is signaling winter. The whole environment is you're going to go in a cave and hibernate now. So there's a certain shutdown that happens that's linked to light. Fascinating stuff. But let's look at anxiety next. Same thing. There's generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, panic disorder. The message, your brain is broken, take this pill. And what's actually happening? Anxiety equals sympathetic nervous system activation, plus shame beliefs. I'm not safe. I'm not good enough. Something bad is going to happen. Feeling stressed non-stop all the time. So the nervous system is doing its job. It's scanning for threat. The problem isn't the scanning. The problem is it learned threat when it should have learned safe. There's no bears chasing us around right now. Anxiety is a signal, not a disease. The signal says, I don't feel safe. Medicating the signal without addressing the cause? It's like disconnecting the smoke alarm instead of putting out the actual fire. So let's look at these as perhaps variations and not simply disorders. ADHD, autism spectrum. Even let's look at personality disorders too. Increasingly understood that ADHD and people with autisms are neuroatypical. They're not broken brains. They have a brain with a variation. The ADHD, I have it. A different operating system, possibly adaptive in different environments. Disorder is only a word in a world that demands we sit at desks and be still and pay attention for long periods of time. Then autism is a different social processing, a sensory experience, a different pattern recognition system. It's a disorder in a world that demands neurotypical performance. But it's a gift in contexts that value deep focus and honesty. So let's also look at personality disorders. The way I've seen these is often there's attachment trauma, plus people don't learn emotional regulation, so they have trouble in relationships with other people. because they don't feel safe and they don't know how to regulate their emotions. So it's not necessarily just a disordered personality. It's survival adaptations that became too rigid. The question isn't what's wrong with you, it's what environment do you need to thrive in? And I have to tell you, the system is collapsing. I was inside it for over 25 years. I was a psychiatric nurse, then a prescriber. I diagnosed people, thousands of patients over the years. I saw the trauma, I saw the body's responses. I was trained in their systems, I went to conferences, continuing education, and I saw a lot of groupthink, tunnel vision. At one point, I challenged the framing of certain attachment disorders and criteria. I tried to integrate it with what I was seeing with my trauma patients, and I was publicly humiliated by my supervisor. So I learned that's what happens when you buck the system. So when I tell you the mental health system is collapsing, I'm not theorizing. I lived it, and I left it. Demand is skyrocketing. If it's a disorder and more than 50% of the population or cohorts in it have this disorder, when is it a disorder and when is it just like normal humans in a bad environment? And then therapists are burning out, prescribers are burning out. For-profit companies are buying up the practices that were run by clinicians. There are high deductible insurance plans. 6-month waits for appointments now. And you might just get a 15-minute med check, replacing like longer treatment where you get to actually talk for a little while, or there's therapy. So I always say if you can find a good therapist, great. So I want to also look at following the money, the profit motive. The pharmaceutical companies profit from lifelong medication treatment. Getting better doesn't make them money. Insurance companies profit from denying care. For-profit mental health companies profit from volume over quality. The sicker you stay, the more money they make. It's true. So what gets lost? Root cause treatment. Time for real relationships to form. And it wasn't always like this when I first went in my career. It was not like it is now. So time for real relationships, with like a real provider-patient relationship, and addressing the environment, not just medicating a person. So what do we do now? At the individual level, like great therapists still exist, like I said, find them. Pills might help you function, so you can work with a med provider, of course, but I always thought they were band-aids. They helped you function. They weren't necessarily a cure to why you were feeling this way in the first place. And body-based practices, everything we talked about in episode 9. Shadow work. Know your own programming. Find your people and do some co-regulation. At the collective level, we need mass individuation, like Jung hoped for. I'm going to talk about some of these things in the next section 2C. So it's not just personal healing, but it does start there with everyone. We need collective healing. We need to recognize the collective shadow. That's a thing. We live in a consumer culture. We're disconnected with a loneliness epidemic. We have the internet and can get in touch with anybody the most easily in human history, but we're the most disconnected now. We have to look at inequality. We have to look at trauma passed down. And then at the generational level, let's look at attachment parenting and break the chain. And lots of adults can help with raising children and give them what they need. Let's give the next generation what we didn't get. One generation of securely attached children changes everything. So here's what I want you to know. You are not disordered. Not just a disorder. You're more than that. You're having a normal response to an abnormal situation. Your nervous system is doing what it learned to do and was designed to do. Your symptoms are signals to you, not necessarily just diseases. And the real disorder, as far as I can see it, a society that's disconnected from itself, intergenerational trauma unaddressed, environments that make nervous systems sick, and systems that profit from keeping you unwell. So, we have a path forward, though, with all that. Need to sound so heavy. Individual healing and collective healing. Know yourself. Heal your nervous system. Connect with safe others. Break the chain. Challenge the system. And this is the end of Phase 2B, how civilization broke us. Phase 2C will be the way out. Deeper into the practices, the integration, and the rebuilding. But for now, know this. You're not broken. You're not just a disorder. You're a human being responding to an environment that wasn't designed for human thriving. And that can change. I'll see you next time.